Good afternoon. I'm Lee Moldaver, the chair of the Santa Barbara Creeks and Watersheds Advisory Committee. We're going to convene our Wednesday, May 13th, 2009 meeting. Let me start by asking the clerk to call the roll to make sure a quorum is here.
Chair Moldaver.
Here.
Jordan is not here this evening. Mr. Schluter.
Here.
Mr. Weber.
Here.
Mr. Wilson.
Here.
And Mr. Jostes and Ms. Falcone and Mr. Hockman are not in attendance.
Yeah, thank you. That brings us to item number 3, approval of the minutes from the March 11th and the March 27th, 2009 meetings.
Second.
Now, is that for both or? Both. All right, so it's been moved and seconded to approve both as submitted. Now, I know Mr. Schluter had a question and a possible correction, so Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, on the March 11th meeting, the last paragraph before subcommittee appointments, it reads that I suggested that the committee have an alternate member in the event that the committee is low on membership. It should be questioned whether there was a mechanism to seat an alternate member in the event the committee is low. And I think the difference is important. So if you could fix that, I would appreciate it.
I would second your correction to the minutes, if that's acceptable to the maker of the motion. Silence implies consent, so I'll assume it is. We have a motion to approve the minutes of the 2 meetings with the 1 correction by Mr. Schluter. All those in favor signify.
I didn't get to do my other correction.
Oh, I'm sorry. One more? Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going.
In the March 27th meetings, in the first paragraph after where it notes Mr. Wilson left at 1:50, that paragraph is correct, in which Mr. Hockman expressed concerns about compliance with funding guidelines. But my memory says there was a subsequent discussion emphasizing that historically the committee had already agreed to devote Measure B funds to that. And that's not indicated in the minutes. And I think it leaves a mistaken impression when that second part of that discussion is not included. So if you have the audio or something from that, or if you could supplement that, I would appreciate that as well. And those are my 2 corrections. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. With the correction and the amendment for the second set of minutes, all those in favor of accepting the minutes for the 2 meetings signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right, the minutes from the meetings of March 11th and March 27th, 2009 are unanimously approved. That brings us to item number 4, adjustments to the agenda. Mr. Benson, are there any proposed agenda adjustments?
No adjustments, Mr. Chair, but I do have an announcement to make regarding the advisory committee recruitment. The committee has 2 positions open, and the recruitment process is currently underway with applications due to the city clerk's office by May 22nd at 5 p.m. And information is available on the city's website.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. I know for those people who are thinking but haven't yet decided about running for mayor or city council, I know there isn't possibly a better thing that you could be doing to serve the city of Santa Barbara than serving on the Creeks Committee. So if you're interested, we need good people. May 22nd will be the day, and you can turn them in person in the clerk's office on the first floor of City Hall. Which brings us to item number 5, public comment. Under the Ralph M. Brown Act, any member of the public who wishes to bring an issue to the attention of a public body that is not listed to be heard on the agenda can come forward and speak. And today we have a request for a speaker, which is it Mr. Vernon Michi. So please come forward and share your views. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, I've lived on Mission Creek between the Delavina and the Alamo Bridge for 35 years. I try to be a steward of that place. I've worked with the people, and we've had numerous sewer spill in that area. So the sewer department promised me that probably the first week of August, they're going to replace that line. We have a bottleneck from 8 inches, 6 inches, dumps into 8 inches. It's a bottleneck right on Alomar, right in the back of the American Red Cross. My concern is this fire we just had. The 3 bridges needs to be inspected. There's some undermining of the footing of the bridge. There's boulders, there's rocks. There's just about anything that you can think of that will obstruct the flow of water going through there. We know in the past where we had the flood on Delavina, and that could happen again. Unbelievable, the cubic yards of dirt underneath the bridge. I called the young lady today, reported underneath the Delavina Bridge, a half a ton of newspapers under the bridge. And that's a fire hazard. We've got lots of service, I don't know, electricity, maybe gas or whatnot underneath the bridges. So I believe something needs to be done to correct the maintenance of that area. The next thing I'm concerned about is at Oak Park. They've got a yard that they're using to store or the recycling of the tree trimming, all of the chippings. If we have a flood, this is a flat area, all of that is headed directly to the ocean. I believe that needs to be enclosed, maybe with a chain link fence to try to retain some of that. So I believe we could do a little maintenance, and because we know it's coming. So I want to thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Michi. I know our staff was writing that down, and our Creeks Division is in regular contact with the County Flood Control Agency. So certainly, the condition in the creek channel going underneath the street and the bridge, in terms of the stacks of newspapers there, I don't know whether it's part of the survival tool from some of society's unfortunates whom you know
It's probably, yes.
are in the area.
There's at least 20 plastic shopping bags that are hanging in there full of newspapers. There's some that are down. I mean, it's unbelievable. I'm in contact with the county flood control or the maintenance of the creek. The maintenance supervisor, I believe, is Rick Thomasy. He's supposed to be contacting me, and Mr. Tom Ferrum. So I'm in contact with them people to try to see what we can do.
Oh.
But I believe, the city, we all need to get together and try to get this thing done before this winter rain.
Tom's the right guy for the floods, and certainly your suggestion about checking in the yard by Oak Park about how the chips are stored before the fall-winter rainy season arrives.
This is a flat area.
Oh, I know.
I've seen it at the flood. The water will come up and they'll float away.
Yeah, and I think they'll follow up on that.
Okay, good. I want to thank you very much. Huh?
No, thank you for coming, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. Are there any other people in the audience who have any public comments to share? All right, hearing none, that would close public comment item number 5. Bring us to item number 6, committee member and staff communications. Roger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason that 11th agenda item caught my eye, and Mr. Benson just reminded me of it, I happened to, at another event, be talking with EFL County, and I expressed my concern about, or I expressed my desire that there be a mechanism that interim appointments be filled. And she kind of surprised me. She said, well, those people who volunteer, their volunteering lasts for 6 months, and all you, meaning Mr. Benson and the chair, have to do is go to the city council and they'll appoint somebody. Now, I was kind of surprised by that. So, and I may have misunderstood her. It was not the best of noise environments. But you might check with city council. If I understand Ms. Falcone correctly, we don't have to wait in the interim to have somebody appointed, and I think that would be useful and would certainly speak to the concerns that I had raised at the previous meeting. So my suggestion is just to check on that and see what the status is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sluiter. Are there any other committee member or staff communications to share? All right, hearing none, that brings us to item number 7, subcommittee reports. I know that the Budget and Finance Subcommittee met recently with the staff to review the budget recommendations that we're going to be hearing in greater detail tonight, so I won't touch on that. Are there any other committee meetings to report on?
No.
All right, thank you, Mr. Benson. That brings us to item number 8, the key business items. Item A, Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration and Stormwater Management Project, attachment 3. So, Mr. Benson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the committee has heard quite a bit about this project over the last several years. I think I will turn it right over to George Thompson, the Creeks Division, Creeks Restoration Planner, to give a brief presentation about the project, and specifically we're going to focus on the bids and moving forward with construction of the project.
Good evening. Tonight's presentation is going to be an overview of the project for those in the community that haven't seen it, but then I'll jump right to the construction costs, which is going to be the focus. So for reference, the project site is in the Royal watershed, and unfortunately I don't have a pointer. I don't see it. Okay, there we go. Here is the Santa Barbara Golf Club, which is at the upper portion of Las Positas Creek. On this map, it shows Las Positas Creek terminating at 101, Highway 101. But in fact, it goes underneath Earl Warren Showground here and then branches out into the Santa Barbara Golf Club. On the next slide, you can get a better picture of that. The Royal Borough watershed is about 6,500 acres, and it encompasses such notable projects as the restoration project at the estuary in Mesa Creek, which we completed several years ago. This is the project site. Up here, you can see the watershed outlined in yellow. The watershed is composed of several mixed land uses. The Santa Barbara Golf Club, which is the large green area, Earl Warren Showgrounds. There's a large amount of residential development, some business, and quite a few surface roads. One item that I want to point out in the creek here is a 1,600-foot long flood control channel lined with concrete. And a portion of this project will help to reduce the flows that go down to that area. Here are the general goals for the project. Through a number of sampling seasons, the Creeks Division has identified several polluted water sources and inputs to the project site. So first and foremost, we want to really direct our activities towards those pollution sites and try to mitigate those. We also want to decrease flooding potential, like I mentioned, and I'll show you in the next several slides how we propose to do that. We also want to enhance wildlife habitat and plant habitat, native plant habitat. And there's several opportunities for education and outreach here. The bulk of the project is on the golf course, and they get upwards of 70,000 rounds a year. That's a lot of folks moving through the site, and so we've got plans for interpretive signage. They can see stormwater management and restoration in action. We also have the Adams School right next door, and a big focus of this project is working with faculty and students on a project there a bioswale project and a rain garden activity there, as well as field trips. And then we also want to maintain course playability because it is occurring in and around a golf course. That's the primary function of the golf club there, is to maintain playability and get players to enjoy the site. So those are the general goals. Here's an overview of the types of wetlands that we're going to be constructing. And again, these are for multiple purposes, including water quality improvement, flood control, and habitat. So these are just really general types of wetlands that we'll be constructing. A number of plunge pools here and grade control structures because we have pretty severe erosion problems on the course. A number of vegetated swales. We also have buffer zones, which are going to be separating some of these constructed wetlands from the heavily impacted golf areas. And then down at the bottom of the project site, we'll have several retention ponds. Here's just a snapshot of a typical upland landscape that'll be implemented as part of the construction of the project. Several elements you want to pay attention to here are landscape features like sandstone boulders and then a very diverse palette of native plants. And here's a typical view of a bioswale. The project won't look exactly like this where we have bioswales, but this is just for illustrative purposes to get you a general idea of what it's going to look like once it's done. So here's an overview of the project site, and let me take a moment to orient you. Here is Earl Warren Showground. Here is 101. Here is Las Positas, the Adams School. Here's the golf course. There are several portions of the project that occur on Adams School, including the rain garden and bioswale here. There's a large input of stormwater from Las Positas and Samarkand that flows along this drainage currently. So we'll be intercepting that, treating it, and constructing several drop pools here, and then it'll eventually flow down to a number of basins and then get to this large basin here. If you look at an aerial shot of the golf course, this is basically where Las Positas Creek terminates. The natural portion goes underground in storm pipes and then pops up again on the golf course. Currently there's a large drainage here, which you can assume was at one time Las Positas Creek, just basically where it used to flow. And so we're taking advantage of those by constructing several drop basins here. So that minimizes construction costs because they're taking advantage of the natural topography. Another branch of the drainage system here goes up into this area. And let me jump up to this neighborhood to explain how that plays into this project. There's an existing storm drain which drains this neighborhood, goes underneath the golf driving range, and then daylights and stormwater just flows down that road. Not in a drainage ditch or anything, just down the middle of the road. We're going to intercept that storm drain, construct a new storm drain under the driving range, and it'll daylight onto the golf course in a large open area between 1 and 18 holes. And then build a large berm here, which will retain stormwater, allow it to slow down, drop out sediment, flow slowly across the course as the existing drainage does, and then pick up into a larger basin here, and then eventually off-site. So these basins, this one and this one, will be vegetated with native plants primarily. This one will be grass. Down in this bottom portion of the course, we've got 3 step pools which drain into each other, and then eventually, if there's a lot of rain, they overflow into an existing storm drain. So we've gone through actually several bid rounds on this project already, and I'll just take a moment to get you up to speed on what's happened since about March. On March 18th, we received 5 bids for construction, and we reviewed those bids, went through them carefully with our staff, engineering staff, golf division staff, and found significant problems with several of them. Actually, all of them. I should revise that. We found problems with all of them, such that we didn't feel comfortable going forward with advising council to award that contract. So on April 7th, they rejected all of those bids. The next day, we turned around, re-advertised the project, and then on April 29th, we received 10 bids. And here is a summary of the 10 bids that we received. They range from about 1.3 million up to 2.3 million. We're recommending to council that we go with the low bidder, and I've reviewed their work history. Their numbers check out for their bid. They seem like they're experienced at this type of work, and I've talked to people that have supervised them on similar types of jobs, and they've had positive things to say about them. So just for the portion of the Creeks project, we're looking at around 1.3 million. And I say for the Creeks project because, as I've explained in previous presentations to the committee, we've combined a golf project with our project. And so the golf project is including more cart path on the course and several green renovations. And so this portion, this number that you see, is only the portion that the Creeks division is paying for. So the total overall bid is actually higher than this, but this is what we're concerned with and what we wanted to show you. So this slide encompasses all of the construction costs. We've got the general contractor is one portion, the majority of it. That's what he's going to get paid to actually do the physical work on the ground. Associated with that are support staff from Public Works Engineering, support staff from consulting companies that can provide technical expertise such as geotechnical supervision of the grading operations. We also have to do a pre-construction biology survey. And for this project, we separated out the plants because of our timeline, and we're buying locally native plants. So we need to plan about a year ahead for that. And then, like I mentioned before, we've got interpretive signage included. So the overall cost estimated for construction, including all of the contingencies, is about 1.75 million. Now, my recommendation that I included in the staff report is that the committee look at how much money we have in reserve, and this is the amount of money that we'll need to transfer from reserve to our capital account to fund all of the construction. And you take the total construction cost minus the money that we have already in the capital account, and that is the number that is recommended for transfer from reserve, 1.421 million. So looking forward, we expect construction to begin in approximately late June. The City Council will be seeing this project in the beginning of June, hopefully award the contract, and we can work with the contractor to get all the submittals done and break ground in June, which is right in our time estimate and what we've been looking at. The project should take about 4 months, and so that would put us into late October. And then written into the contract is a maintenance period. So once grading and installation of plants and irrigation is done, then the contractor takes on a 90-day maintenance period. That's to get plants established and remove weeds and that sort of work. And then once that's done, the Creeks Division will take over maintenance for 5 years. That's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Very excellent overview of the project, and very good news that we had 10 responsible bidders. So while a member of the public turns his slip in, well, why don't we take the public testimony first? I understand the speaker is wrestling with dengue fever, but feels so strongly about supporting this project that he came down. So if you could identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. I'm Brian Troutwine with the Environmental Defense Center, and the EDC is here tonight to support this project, the Arroyo Burro Las Positas Watershed Restoration Project, as I like to refer to it, because it really does restore the watershed's functions and hydrology. And that's so important in protecting our water quality, because if we can slow down the water, we can filter out the pollutants. This project also, in addition to improving water quality, has great potential for enhancing habitat and increasing groundwater recharge, many other benefits, tremendous benefits to the community from this project. We're here tonight simply to urge your support for this project and ask you to move it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Troutwine. Are there any questions or comments for staff from other members of the committee? I know this is a project that we've gone over in some detail during the earlier part of the year. Roger?
I just have one financial question. In Shaw's bid, did they include a contingency?
No, they did not. That is their base bid, what it's going to cost them, and their profit is built into that bid, but we don't know what it is.
No, I'm not concerned about the profit. I'm just wondering.
No contingency.
I was concerned
That's just
that we were adding a contingency upon their contingency, and I didn't want
no,
that to happen.
just one contingency for staff at our discretion in case something happens during the project that we didn't foresee.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple quick questions. Mr. Thompson, the revised RFP that went out, did it recast the requirement of the prime contractor away from being a golf contractor and just a general contractor with a golf component?
Yes, it did. And let me explain.
Great.
For those people in the public that don't know what Mr. Wilson's talking about. When we first went out to bid, we put a restriction on the companies that could actually bid on this project. Because it's on a golf course, we needed, in the first round, we said those people bidding on this project have to have done 3 golf course projects within the past 3 years. And we received bids, and the people that submitted bids, some were qualified, some weren't. We discussed it with Golf Division and came up with the best solution for everyone, and that's the people doing the Golf Division's portion of the project have to have that golf course experience. And we're going to be working closely with Shaw or whoever gets the contract and the Golf Division to make sure that oversight is provided and golf course operations can proceed as normal.
Second question is, considering the golf course component of the project, does the golf committee or whoever the oversight body of the golf course is, what extent do they have in recommending to council the contractor for the golf component of the project? They're actually meeting. And the follow-up to that, which you could probably just kind of get right to the point and simply answer the first question is there a potential, if maybe it's already been answered, but is there a potential conflict of interest, not conflict of interest, but actually a conflict of recommendation between golf and creeks?
There probably is that potential, but I've met personally with the Golf Advisory Committee several times. I've talked to the golf course architect and reviewed the company that is part of Shaw's bid, and he's familiar with them. They're a nationally recognized company. He's comfortable with their work, so I don't really foresee that situation playing out.
That's great. And I just wanted to leave a comment that I've done work on a project with Shaw and his crew in carpentry and was very pleased with their professionalism and attention to detail.
Excellent.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. George, any questions? Okay. I'd like to especially call the public's attention to the amount of detail work that the Creek staff put together, not only in outreach, but in preparing first for the original bid process and then doing a very, very quick turnaround at the same time that everyone in the program was preparing for the budget process and grant application deadlines. And I know that a huge amount of work has been accomplished on a very high professional level in a very short time. And I think it's yielded very, very positive results. So I want to commend George and Cameron, and through you, the entire team that worked on this for a job very well done. I'd like to see if there is a motion to recommend to the City Council that they accept the bid and move on with Roger.
Yes, per the agenda, I recommend that council authorize the transfer of funds from the Creek's unappropriated reserve to cover construction costs and authorize proceeding with construction.
It's moved by Roger and seconded by George. Are there any comments to the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion to recommend to council to transfer money from the reserve to move the project forward signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Right, the motion carries unanimously. So thank you again, George. And Mr. Benson, as we transition to the next item, could you update us a little bit? I know originally you were hoping that the City Council schedule for May 19th might be able to accommodate this on the consent calendar, but I know it's really busy. Do you have a later guesstimate on when this might happen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as we had stated, we were shooting for a May 19th council date to bring this to council as a very aggressive timeline for us to reject the other bids, get a new bid out, get the bids, review the bids, make sure everything was in order, and still make the May 19th deadline. It doesn't look like we are going to do that. We would normally move to the following week, which would be May 26th. There's no council meeting that day because of the Memorial Day holiday the day before. So that puts us on June 2nd. We've been calendared for that date now, and we're looking forward to having the item on the agenda on June 2nd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benson. So obviously all supporters of the project, and I know Mr. Troutwine is writing this down, and people at home, either come on June 2nd or send your comments to the council before that, and certainly they'll be well rested for the hearing because they won't have to meet for Memorial Day. That brings us to item 8B, which also goes with attachment 4, and that's the recommended fiscal year 2010 budget. And before staff begins the presentation, I'd like to similarly say that the job that Mr. Benson and Ms. Zachary did in briefing the council on budget parameters for the coming year last week, right before the fire, was exceptional and very lucid and persuasive. So I want to thank you for doing that. But now you're going to share that with the committee and anyone who's watching who missed that part that deals particularly with creeks and watersheds. So Cameron?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for attending that meeting. That was a marathon, and I think we wrapped it up at 11 o'clock at night, late on a Monday night, and Chair Moldaver stayed through the whole 4 or 5 hours of a budget presentation.
Would that were true, but he stayed through the library, the overview from Parks and Recreation, the presentation for creeks and for golf, and at that point went on to his next meeting, leaving the fate of the program in the hands of the council, which is where the community decided it belongs properly.
Okay. So good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Cameron Benson. I'm the Creeks Division Manager. And this evening I'm going to present to you the Creeks Division's proposed budget for fiscal year 2010. For those of you who have gone through the budget process before, you know that normally the city will develop and adopt a 2-year budget. This year, because of economic uncertainty and the difficulties in forecasting, particularly on the revenue front, what is going to be happening 2 years from now, caused the city administrator to decide to just do a 1-year budget. So we'll just be presenting for the next fiscal year, which begins July 1st, 2009 and runs through June 30th of 2010. I want to start out by talking a little bit about the budget process. 3 of the 4 of you sit on the budget subcommittee, so you know that we started back in February with a budget subcommittee meeting and started reviewing some of the priorities and began crafting the budget at that time. The entire city budget was completed in mid-April and presented to the city council by the city administrator on April 21st. The next day, we had our second budget subcommittee meeting to review where our budget stood at that point and kind of get into the budget in some more detail. That evening, we presented the Creeks Division budget to the Park and Recreation Commission as part of the larger Parks and Recreation Department budget. I'm looking at my timeline there. We had a second presentation or workshop with the Park and Recreation Commission on April 30th. As the chair mentioned, the Creeks Division budget, again as part of the Parks and Recreation Department budget, was presented to City Council on May 4th. And here we are tonight, May 13th, to present the budget to the full committee, which will then make recommendations to the Park and Recreation Commission and to the City Council on the Creeks Division budget for FY10. All of these meetings are noticed public meetings, are open to the public, and we encourage people to attend and provide input, and that includes the meetings going forward. The City Council will make the ultimate decision, ultimate budget decisions. Those meetings will occur, and budget adoption will occur in June, and the first meeting that's scheduled is June 2nd, which is a Tuesday. Okay, so getting into the numbers, I think I'll start off with the revenues. The revenue projections, at this point, we'll just call that the TOT revenue, the Measure B revenue, and interest that we're getting from the department, or the finance department at this time, are down about $325,000 from the projected revenues for the current fiscal year. That's about 11.1% decline. And normally when I put this slide together, we just have our projected revenue on the slide. I made it up as a projected revenue and transfer because as we've discussed since last October when we were developing our capital improvement program for the coming 6 years, we have planned to transfer some of the unappropriated reserve into the operating budget for capital projects, and that amount comes to roughly $730,000. And so the Measure B plus interest revenue plus the transfer in from the reserve is sufficient to balance the proposed budget at $3,338,000. I want to take just a second to explain something that I just said that confuses a lot of people, and that is the difference between the operating budget and the capital budget. This came up in our subcommittee meeting, and I just wanted to take just a second to explain that. The capital budget is used for projects. Generally, they're projects that cost over $100,000. They're generally longer-term projects that take more than a year to complete. Those are sort of for the most part, those are our building projects. Our operating budget is our ongoing operations, maintenance work that we do, water quality monitoring, and so forth. The way that this budget works is money comes each year. Money is transferred out of our operating budget into our capital budget. So all of the money goes into operating. Some of it goes out into capital for those specific projects, which are identified in the capital improvement program, and we'll go over those in just a moment. I also want to note that none of these revenue projections include any of the pending grants that we have, grant applications that we have submitted so far. We don't, when we're budgeting for the next year, we look for certainty, and we don't include projected grant revenue in the coming year. On the expenditure side, there are really two line items that I want to highlight from this slide. The first is the salaries and benefit line item. You'll see an increase there from about $863,000 to about $950,000. It's approximately a 10.1% increase, and that increase can be attributed primarily to three things. First is a fiscal year 09 reclassification of a half-time engineering technician position into a full-time code enforcement position. Secondly, and this is something that's newly proposed for the coming fiscal year, and that is that the Creeks Division will be taking on 10% of the salary and benefit costs of the Assistant Parks and Recreation Director. And we're doing that because that really reflects the actual hours that Jill Zachary spends doing program administration for the Creeks Division. And lastly, the third thing that this reflects is the new Memorandum of Understanding adopted by the City Council for general employees. The other line item I wanted you to take a look at is the capital program line item. You can see an increase from FY 2009 from $870,000 to FY10, $1,175,000. That's a 26% increase from the past fiscal year, and actually our capital transfer in FY8 was at $640,000. So you've seen significant growth and use of funds for capital water quality and restoration projects. The other line items in this table are, as you can see, are substantially the same as FY09 or even decrease a little bit. Here's a budget breakdown by category, so you can see the percentage of the budget going to each of those different areas, and it shows them as a percentage of the overall budget. You can see it largely breaks down into the three categories: capital program, salaries and benefits, and supplies and professional services. For the last several years, probably since the inception of this program, we have, when in presenting the budget to this committee, we've had questions about how much or what percentage of the funds are going to the three main program areas that we work on, which are water quality improvement, creek restoration, and community outreach. And so this is the breakdown of the proposed FY10 budget. This chart shows the breakdown in a percentage format, broken down by those same three program areas. However, what I did here was try to break it down a little bit further to show you the differences between the capital and operating budget going to those specific issue areas. So what you can see over here, these two green colored areas are the creek restoration. This is the creek restoration program area, which includes a lot of maintenance of our restoration projects. This is our creek restoration capital, and this is our water quality capital. This is our water quality programs. And then the burgundy colored section is our community outreach. To get into some of the specific numbers in the proposed budget, we're continuing to do water quality research and water quality monitoring. These are the specific costs of implementing our water quality monitoring program, including our lab analysis, microbial source tracking. Of course, is our DNA-based analysis of water and water quality, looking specifically for human genetic material in the water, human waste. Those numbers are slightly reduced from last year's numbers, and the reason for that is we received 2 grants from the state of California through their Clean Beaches Initiative program that reduced the amount of funds we needed to budget for doing that work here. We have a few new and special projects that I just wanted to highlight going into next year. The first thing and the biggest number up there is creek restoration project maintenance. In the past, it has been our practice to include project maintenance cost as part of the capital budget. So when we build a program, we would factor in maintenance costs for that project and pay for them out of the capital budget. We've changed that approach and are now going to be including our maintenance for our restoration projects in our operating budget. So the breakdown for that $96,000, that's not just one project. That's actually several different projects, and that includes our Arroyo Burro Estuary project, the Old Mission Creek at Bonnet Park. We have 25,000 of that 96,000 is for all of the different community stewardship projects we've done, for example, in Stevens Park, Oak Park, on Vernon Street, on Punta Gorda Street, and others. It includes, as you saw in the earlier presentation, we will have ongoing maintenance after the first 90 days on the Upper Las Positas Creek project. So we've budgeted funds for that project as well. I wanted to note on that I don't have anything in this presentation about the Upper Las Positas Creek project, which you just recommended to council, and the reason for that is going to occur in this budget year. This is our FY10 budget, so this is a prospective document, and so even though we are going to have a major restoration project underway, it doesn't appear in this presentation. We also have a new creek tree program and clean water business assistance program that you're aware of. This will be the first full year of implementation of those programs. And then the last item on this slide is a stormwater ordinance revision. This is something that is required by the city's stormwater management program that was recently adopted by the Regional Water Board. And we are in the first phase of that program, which is to identify any kind of inconsistencies between existing zoning ordinances and stormwater quality improvement strategies and policies. We have a number of continuing programs. I just wanted to note for all of these programs, the proposed dollar amounts are nearly identical to the FY09 dollar amounts. The exception to that is the first one, which is the creek cleanups and waste management. As you know, we subcontract out for contractors to do removal of debris and litter and furniture and all kinds of things from the creeks. This year, in FY09, the budget for that contract was $100,000. This year, I'm proposing to move that to $120,000. I don't know if we will fully utilize that amount, but the proposal is to put it in there so that it's available to make sure that we can keep the creeks clean. This is a list of our proposed capital program. Committee's familiar with these, so I don't want to go through all of the projects. The committee reviewed these and adopted this list in an October 2008 capital improvement program meeting. A couple of items in here that I might want to highlight is the first item, the catch basin debris screens, the storm drain screens. We've installed those over in the Old Mission Creek watershed, which is the west side neighborhood, and they've been very effective at keeping debris and trash from getting into the storm drain system and then into the creeks and onto the beaches. Our plan with that is to, as you can see, we have $100,000 on that. Our plan is to slowly work our way through the city, identifying target areas that have the worst trash and debris problems, and to install those debris screens in those locations first. I also wanted to mention this project in the middle of the list, the Laguna Watershed Water Quality Improvement. That is a continuation of the Laguna Watershed study that we just did to identify sources of pollution in the Laguna Watershed, which is largely the downtown area of Santa Barbara, and to identify potential solutions for cleanup. And this funding will help us move forward with the planning phase of a project to address the problems that we found through that study. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out we have 2 items on here, the Mission Lagoon restoration and bird refuge restoration. Creeks Division is working with the Parks and Recreation Department as well as other city departments and divisions to develop management plans for both Mission Lagoon and for the bird refuge that will lead to improved water quality and habitat value. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the unappropriated reserve, because this year we are proposing to take some funds out of the unappropriated reserve and put them into our budget for FY10. And I want just to remind the committee the purpose for the reserve when it was set up by the committee was to pay for capital projects, grant matches, and revenue shortfalls. And the recommendation from this committee for a balance in the unappropriated reserve is to maintain a balance that is roughly 2 large projects for us. And so the number that I use is the cost of the Arroyo Estuary Restoration Project, which was just over $1.5 million. So my target for a reserve balance is approximately $3 million. Now, having said that, I want to note that this year in particular is a year where I think it would be justified for the program to utilize some of the reserve funds and go below that amount, because we happen to have all 3 of the conditions. We've got a lot of capital projects. We've got grant matches, and we've got revenue shortfalls. We're seeing our revenue go down for the first time since this program's inception. So arguably we could go into the reserves this year, but we're not proposing to do that. Instead, we estimate that the balance of the reserve will be $3.1 million as we're heading into fiscal year 10. And I think that that's a conservative amount, and I think it's appropriate to be conservative at this time with the economic uncertainty that we have in front of us. So just to walk through the table, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. At the end of FY08, our budget, our unappropriated reserve balance was $1.8 million, largely because of grant revenue that we've received this year, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We anticipate having $250,000 unused and unencumbered at the end of FY09, which, as you know, from the operating budget will roll into the unappropriated reserves, increasing that $4.8 million balance. We also have a line item in our FY09 capital budget for a technical assistance program. And as you know, the technical assistance program has become the Creek Tree program and the business assistance program. And as we discussed when those programs were created, we are going to fund those programs through our operating budget. So as I mentioned earlier, we have those as new line items in our operating budget. And so we're going to transfer the money that was in the capital account and put that into the unappropriated reserve. And it works its way back into our operating budget to cover the costs of those new programs. So that's an additional, we're estimating that at about $210,000 remaining at the end of this fiscal year that will be transferred. If council accepts your recommendation with regard to the Las Positas Creek project and transfers $1.4 million out of the reserve, that will decrease the reserve amount by approximately $1.4 million. And then through this budget, we're proposing a $730,000 transfer from unappropriated reserves into the budget. So that leaves us with a balance of just over $3 million. I wanted to say a little bit about grants, our grant efforts. This year we've been very, very successful securing grants for various projects. As you can see, the total grants we've received. Now these are grants we've actually secured, not applications, which I'll show you in just a second. But we're over $1.3 million in grant funds coming in this year, which amounts to over 50%, a 50% match to the Measure B funds coming in. Pretty significant leveraging of the Measure B funds. These are the grant applications we have pending. A little over $13 million in grants pending right now. One of the reasons that number is so high is because of the stimulus bill that was passed in January. Opened up opportunities for us with some of our projects to secure funds for construction of those projects. We have not heard response on any of these grants, but we know that they're very, very competitive, and we also know that our projects are competitive within the pool that applied for it. So another thing I wanted to say about this is you can see there's a lot of repetition. These projects are repeated here often because they are ready to go and they fit the guidelines for each of these different grant programs. So obviously, if we were to be awarded all of this funding, we would have to give some back. We don't anticipate being awarded all of this funding. So you can see there are different grant programs. This is our fish passage project at Talent Road. This is through a NOAA Open Rivers program. ARA stands for the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. That's the stimulus bill. So where you see that, those are stimulus. This would provide us full matching funds for construction of that project. This would provide us full matching funds for construction of that project. This was a Prop 84 grant we submitted last fall. Those bonds were all frozen in December. We keep hearing that the freeze is thawing out, but we haven't gotten a final word on that, so we don't know whether they've even begun reprocessing these applications. We're just about to submit 2 additional applications at the end of this week to the California Department of Fish and Game for construction on these 2 projects. And again, where there were funds available, this funding would essentially provide the full match for us to construct the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration Project. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here on the storm drain screens, because I brought that up earlier, we have $100,000 in our budget for next year to kind of move forward on a piecemeal basis through the city and put storm drain screens in. We have put in a grant application for approximately $1.8 million. That would be sufficient for us to complete the entire project for the whole city. Okay, so before concluding, I just had one other item that I wanted to bring up that was not part of the proposed budget, but that came up during the May 4th City Council presentation. Councilmember Falcone, who's the liaison for this committee, raised a question about the possibility of shifting the cost of current beach cleaning and grooming work from the Parks and Recreation Department, which is a general fund department, budget to the Creeks Division, or to the Measure B budget. And she wanted to put the item out there for discussion, and she specifically requested input from the Creeks Advisory Committee. So as you are formulating any questions or comments about the proposed budget, please consider your input on that topic as well. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Benson. Excellent and detailed presentation. Even better, perhaps, than the one you shared last Monday with the council, maybe because it's several hours earlier. Are there any questions from members of the committee? I know that the Budget and Finance Committee has already seen another version of this, so let me see if there are any questions from Mr. Wilson. I know we also have a slip from a member of the public.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question for Mr. Benson. I think this is just a calendar issue, fiscal year 09 versus 010. So the transfer from reserves, if approved by council for the Las Positas project of approximately $1.4 million, that would essentially occur in fiscal year 09, and that's why it doesn't show up in these numbers, correct? It's just a kind of a keeping track of the numbers. I'm just keeping my head straight.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Wilson, yes, that's correct. We're on the June 2nd council agenda for that item. If council votes to make the transfer, it will happen before the end of June, so in fiscal year 09.
Okay, that's great. And one other quick question, and Chair, I will have comments, but I just want to keep the questions quick to let it go around the room. In the very beginning, there was like a 10% budgetary, not 10%, but there was a budget increase for something regarding a MOU, general something or other. Could you elucidate a little on that, please?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Mr. Wilson. The most of the employees in the city belong to a union that negotiates labor contracts with the city council or with the city, and they're approved by the city council. Those contracts include a variety of different items, but one of those items that they include involve salaries and benefits. And when the city council reviews and approves a contract, it has an impact on the budgets of all the city departments and divisions because it affects each individual employee.
So that revision is citywide across all the departments?
Yes, although there are a number of different unions that represent different groups of city employees.
That makes sense. And okay, that's great. Thank you.
Are there any other specific questions from committee members before we hear from the public? Mr. Schluter?
I have a couple of questions, then I'd also like to make some comments. My first question is, on the suggestion by Ms. Falcone on the beach cleaning, you didn't attach a number to that. Is there a number you can attach to that suggestion? It's hard to consider it without.
Right. Since the current operation for the beach cleaning, beach grooming is performed by the Parks and Recreation Department, and we have the assistant director of the department here, Jill Zachary. I'll ask her to respond because the answer is a little bit complicated.
Oh, shucks.
Good evening, committee members. The beach maintenance program is operated by the Parks Division of the Parks and Recreation Department, and we do a variety of different things. And so the cost depends on the type of activity you're asking about. Councilmember Falcone, we believe, was referring to the beach grooming and raking aspect of the work that we do there. And the cost for this fiscal year, so fiscal year 2009, just looking at those costs is $142,000. That includes salary and benefits of our equipment operators, the staff that drop off the dump truck, staff that operate pickup trucks in the areas where we don't actually use mechanized equipment for various reasons, and then the cost to maintain and operate the equipment. And the last cost that's in there that's a significant cost is the cost to contract with a biological consulting firm, because we do surveys for snowy plovers before we operate equipment on the beach. The Parks Division also does a lot of other activities on the beach. We hand clean around the perimeters of the outfalls. We prepare and put out lifeguard towers and remove them. We support any beach activity festival. As you know, lots of people go to the 4th of July. So that is a general fund activity that we do. And we also deal with dead animals. When we have storms and lots of beach debris that needs to be cleaned up, we're involved in that. And when we have boats that break free of their moorings and land on the beach and are not removed by the boat owners, we also provide that service. And so when you take into consideration all the activities on the beach, the actual budget, and I'm in the point where I need reading glasses and I did not bring them, is $260,000. So it gives you a break if you're just looking at the mechanized activity on the beach, which is generally what people think of when they think of beach maintenance.
Ms. Falcone, that was her suggestion, was just that component of it, as far as you understand.
As far as we understand it, yes. We've broken it down because we really wanted to understand exactly where our resources are targeted for the different types of activities, because we actually pay for those costs in different elements of the Parks Division budget.
And is it your understanding she's suggesting this change or opening the discussion of this change for the FY10 budget, or conceptually for later on budgets?
It's my understanding that she's opening the discussion with an eye to the next fiscal year. So yes, fiscal year 10.
Okay, so that if that did come to pass, we would have to make some adjustments in the budget that Mr. Cameron has just proposed.
Really, I think it's
on the order of $140K.
Yeah, I think it's really a discussion item at this point for the committee in terms from a policy standpoint, and really what your considerations would be. As you know, because of the economic situation that we have, we are looking at ways to change management of city operations where it makes sense to do that. And so I think that's why that suggestion was made, that the council member was just interested in a discussion at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Cameron, on the budget, one of your questions, and bear with me, I know I should know the answer to this, but your answer to Mr. Wilson confused me. You said that the transfer for the Upper Las Positas project would be in 2009 and therefore wouldn't be in the 2010 budget. But on your unappropriated reserve slide, you show the $1.4 million transfer in the 2010 budget. Could you clarify that for me?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Schluter, thanks for that question. Let me go back to the slide to take a look. What I was trying to do was when we discussed this and I went through this verbally with this at the subcommittee meeting, it was confusing to go through it verbally because we have things happening in both FY9 and FY10, and so I tried to put everything together that's happening over the next 60 days, which is where we have that transition. Right. And the Upper Las Positas Creek project will happen in FY9. All of the other things will happen sort of by magic at midnight on June 30th, and as we transition into the next fiscal year. And so what I wanted you to see was essentially entering FY10. That's what our projected unappropriated reserve balance will be. We also had a question at our last meeting from Mr. Jordan about what's the impact between the budget and the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration Project, and so I was trying to show all of those changes in one slide.
If I can pick a really small nit on that slide, it's 729,709, and on your projected reservoir, it's 728,709. You might want to correct.
You got it. It's just a typo. It should be 728,709.
Okay,
that's the right number.
And my last question is, on this slide, the 250 and the 210 Ks don't show up on your projected revenue and transfer slide. Can you explain that to me? Because this slide shows that they are transfers.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Schluter, the operating at the end of the year, if you have unencumbered funds in your operating budget and you have a reserve, as we do, that those unencumbered operating funds will automatically transfer into. It's an automatic. It transfers into your reserve. We're preparing a memo regarding those capital reserves because ordinarily those would carry over. So we're preparing a memo to the finance department explaining why we want to transfer those money into the unappropriated reserves. And what I was focused on was transfers out of the unappropriated reserves in back into essentially a working budget.
Thank you.
Mr. Weber, do you have any additional questions?
Yeah, I had thank you, Chair. I had one clarification question. Can you please go, Mr. Benson, to the FY09 grants secured slide? I just wanted to talk a little bit about these as they compare to the 09 budget that was approved, and I'm curious if these 09 grants secured, can the money that's left over from the fiscal year 09 then go in to cover budget items of the 010 budget? For instance, I was looking at the microbial source tracking budget, which has been $100,000 for a couple of years now, and I'm assuming that the State Water Resources Control Board source tracking protocol project, a grant of 477280 will be applied to that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is this grant is for a specific project that is actually identified in our capital.
Turn your mic on.
The grant from the State Water Resources Control Board for $477,000 that you see there for source tracking protocol project is a specific project dealing with a specific watershed in the city, looking at very specific issues in that watershed. We have other projects and other uses for the microbial source tracking that we apply those additional funds to. In last year's budget, the $100,000 that you mentioned was to begin providing funding for the project we got the grant for. Now we have full funding for that project. We've significantly reduced that line item in the proposed budget for this year, and that's because we do have other small projects that use the microbial source tracking technology to help us identify solutions to some water quality pollution problems. And an example of that is we just went through and we did the Laguna Watershed study, which was part of that other grant you see up there, the $220,000 grant. And as you all know, as we've done those studies in the past, sometimes we end up with more questions than what we had, or new questions compared to what we had going in. And in the case of the Laguna Watershed study, we've got a situation where we almost have the answer to something. The scope of work in the grant doesn't get us to the answer, and so we have a separate contract with UCSB and the Holden Lab at UCSB. It's a $26,000 contract to give us to do that extra work to get that complete answer, and that's what comes out of that item you mentioned.
So are all the grants then that are in this 09, are they more or less specifically allocated to what we're doing this year then?
No, they're all specifically allocated to capital projects, and
Okay.
and for example, the 2 fish and game grants you see there are for design work on fish passage projects. We're now in a cycle where we're seeking funding for construction of those projects. So those funds will almost be used up. We had a little bit of a delay on the source tracking protocol project because those funds were frozen in December of this year, and then they were released in April, and then they were frozen again 3 days later, and now we're in a little bit of limbo, but what we're hearing from Sacramento is that they're cautiously optimistic we'll be able to go forward and complete that project. But that project was originally designed to be complete in April of 2010, and we have now had a 6-month essentially a stop work order from the funder.
One last question then, because the reason I ask is when you started your presentation, you said that all the estimates are essentially grant-free. So I'm trying to get a handle on if some of this money will actually go towards funding this year's, or O10's activities, then we actually, the number that's presented here, the 3.1 million, is almost like a worst-case scenario, and I don't want to say it with certainty either, but there's an expectation that a fair bit of that could be some of this leveraged funds.
In looking at what I was saying was, in looking at the revenue projections for FY10, we have not projected to receive any grant funding. Sometimes what happens with certain projects is because of recommendations we've had from the committee that we would really like to see this project heavily leveraged with grants in order to proceed. We are looking at a situation where we may put our matching funds into our capital program, but if we don't receive the grants, we just won't go forward with that project. And so in other words, some of the projects are almost conditioned on, if you're successful with the grants, we'll go forward with it. If you're not, then we'll pull those funds back. And but I guess when you're looking at the operating budget for the division, none of that is grant funded in particular. The grants are generally all focused on the capital projects.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Benson, in terms of the questions. And I'd like to mention again to people in the audience that staff did a very extensive presentation on this topic for our Budget and Finance Committee and fielded a large number of very detailed specific questions several weeks ago. We do have a request from a member of the public to speak. So before we get into committee comments and hopefully a motion for recommendation on the proposed budget, I'd like to call Mr. Trautwein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Brian Trautwein from the Environmental Defense Center. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the great work of the staff bringing in $1.3 million in grants to the program in fiscal year 09 alone. That's really impressive, and with all the different government agencies we work with at the EDC, I can't think of one that has brought in such a high percentage of grants to help fund its important programs. It's also good to see an increase in the capital projects. It seems like they've increased from year to year the last several years in order to restore our creeks and improve water quality. And that's really the intent and the purpose of Measure B, so that's good to see as well. We also like some of the new programs that the city is delving into, like the Creek Tree Program and the Clean Water Business Assistance Program. These are innovative, and I think they'll be very effective. We're excited to see these in the budget. And the creek cleanups, very important. And education, very effective. Who in town hasn't heard or seen advertisements about the importance of protecting our creeks and our water quality? It's good to see these elements funded as well. Many of the capital improvement projects that were listed, not a bad project amongst them, really. I could get into details and say which one we think is better, but they're all good. We like them. The catch basins, invasive plant removals, Mission Creek restoration, the list goes on and on. Very exciting stuff. And of course, EDC is the city's NGO partner on the Mission Creek restoration project. And also on this rather new idea of the kind of shifting the funds to the beach grooming and raking, that's a concern. Measure B was really meant to supplement the general fund and to supplement existing programs, not to supplant the general fund. Measure B was passed because the existing programs just weren't quite getting the job done in terms of protecting our creeks and our water quality. So Measure B was really meant to go above and beyond that. Back when we were working to pass Measure B, there were concerns amongst those of us working so hard, going door to door, educating the public about the benefits of Measure B and protecting our creeks and water quality. And one of the concerns was that during lean times, the Measure B funds could be looked at, could be tapped, could be diverted to fund general fund programs. And that seems to be exactly what we're hearing wind of now. So we think this will be a significant shift away from the intent and purpose of Measure B, and we hope that the city won't go in that direction. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Trautwein. think that would be a good segue to transition from committee questions to comments or recommendation and a motion. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. Before I can make a motion or even a straw poll or anything like that, the issue that Councilmember Falcone brought up about transferring funds to the mechanized programs of beach cleanup and the like of the Park and Recs Division. Just a couple quick thoughts I want to share for the benefit of those sitting with me here and also everybody else in the room. The first is I do question whether or not with the legalities of the Brown Act, if it's even appropriate for us to even discuss this at all right now without proper noticing. Because I think from a policy perspective, this is significant enough of a question that it should be formally noticed. And certainly for those of us here to be given time to think about it, and also for the public to have proper noticing so they can comment as well. Regarding that as well, I think that is a significant enough of a policy shift where it would set a incredibly dangerous precedent that I do believe flies in the face of the creation and the public voting to support Measure B. And from that perspective alone, anyone would have an extremely difficult time in getting me to support that in any way, shape, or form. And the third thing I wanted to mention is I think from an ecological perspective, I don't know if I particularly support raking the beaches clean anyway. So I just kind of, for the benefit of those here, I just kind of want to share my feelings, and you could maybe consider that an informal straw poll vote. And that's my basic comments right now. And short of the chair, who's actually just returned, that's it for my comments on that. Thanks.
Yes, I think it's also appropriate to respond to the comment from Ms. Falcone. And I agree with Mr. Wilson that it seems like this is a sufficiently important issue that it ought to be noticed so the public is aware that we're talking about it. As far as I can figure, the 142K is about 5% of our budget, and the 260K is about 10% of our budget, round numbers. That's a significant chunk of our budget, and I think that we should have more time than just right now talking about it, and I'd like it not to be a part of the 2010 budget if it can be avoided because it's so late in the process. And the other concern that I have also has been expressed by Mr. Wilson is that I'm concerned about the precedent. We took over the, if it's correct, Mr. Benson, we took over the MUTMIT program, right, in its entirety?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Schluter, for the last several years at least, the Creeks Division has participated in providing some of the MUTMITs in some of the parks in the city to the tune of about $5,500 a year. The entire program to provide MUTMITs for the parks that have them is about $15,000 a year. What happened with that was it was a situation where the general fund is having trouble this year. I talked to the Parks Division manager, and he told me that they are planning to provide the same level of MUTMITs that they have always provided, but he doesn't know how much funding he's going to have or how long that's going to last. And he's got a small amount of money for a lot of high priority things. And so he said, we're gonna try to start out putting them out there, and if we run out of money or we need to redirect funds to other things in December, then we won't have them available. So what I proposed was to, rather than just put the $5,500 in as a line item in our budget as we've done in the past, I bumped that up to the full $15,000. And we may not need to use that, but I wanted to have it in the budget, and we talked about it in our subcommittee, and it's not a huge amount of money. I think that it's a place we can get a big bang for the buck. It's there if we need it, but the intent is to make the normal contribution and then have that as a backup so that we could keep that program going if necessary.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not questioning the program. What I'm expressing to Jill is that I'm in support of Mr. Wilson, is that I'm afraid of the precedent that such an action, especially late in the budget process, creates, and that, oh, look at those funds over there, let's go after those. And I'm concerned about that. Let's just leave it like that. And I'll leave my other comments on the whole budget as we go around. But I just wanted to respond to that particular issue. Thank you.
Mr. Weber, any general or
Yeah,
specific comments?
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, I'm not going to belabor it, but I'm in a complete agreement with Mr. Schluter and Mr. Wilson, and I think Mr. Trotwine really hit the nail on the head in terms of the precedents, and it's perhaps an inappropriate use of Measure B funds to take it on. I do appreciate, though, the Park and Rec's financial situation. I think of all the city divisions are getting hit amongst the hardest. So, hopefully they can find funding elsewhere if it really becomes threatened. But are we taking comments now on the budget as well?
The purpose of the hearing is actually comments on the budget, hopefully leading to a motion to recommend to the Park and Recreation Commission and to the City Council that the recommended O10 budget as just presented by Mr. Benson and augmented with information by Ms. Zachary should be put over to them for adoption. So it's at some point, hopefully soon, we'll get a motion to actually talk about what's on the agenda for the meeting.
Okay, well, in terms of comments on the budget, I would just commend Mr. Benson and the Creek staff on doing a wonderful job of putting together a very detailed and thoughtful budget. I don't have any concerns unless my fellow committee members have a concern. I would put the motion on the table as you so eloquently presented it just a moment ago.
You mean, Mr. Weber, that the committee recommend approval of the Creeks Division fiscal year 2010 budget to the Park and Recreation Commission and the City Council?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second to that?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Before we continue the next round of discussion or come to a vote, I also would like to thank and appreciate staff from the Creeks Division for the huge amount of work crunching the numbers to try to get maximum value to the community for the purposes of Measure B from every dollar, not only within the city and from the transit occupancy tax that we're very fortunate to get for the visitor serving industry, but as Mr. Benson said, to try to leverage the money from outside the area to have other programs partner with us and pick up as much a bit of the cost as possible. I know anytime you're in a budget year where money is short, there are skeptical people in the community or in the press who wonder whether the city is showing as frugal a stewardship as possible. And I think the amount of work that went on within the Parks and Recreation Division and within the Creeks Division to try to get these numbers ready for the City Council for public discussion has been Herculean and heroic. And I would simply like to say that Councilwoman Falcone has been very dedicated as our council liaison in recent years. And I think that the suggestion that she's floated as a trial balloon was simply with the idea of trying to be creative and innovative in a time when the city is in serious trouble. And I think she means the best for the program as well as for the city, because as a member of the City Council, she has to look at the big picture. That being said, I think she's probably aware of what happened to the image of the state legislature when there was a public commitment that the California lottery would supplement education and not be used as a substitute for existing funding for education. And within a year after that passed, former Speaker Brown began backing out money into other programs, and some of them were worthwhile programs. But the end result now is that with all the money that the California lottery grosses, less than 4% actually goes to application for public education. And I think that especially in this year where in the fall there's going to be an initiative election on another area of the charter that's partly based on the public's confidence in the city council to do the right thing. I think it goes pretty clearly against the original intent of Measure B when it was on the ballot to use Measure B funds to backfill other areas for existing programs. And I think Councilwoman Falcone supported Measure B when it was first on the ballot before she was on the city council. And I think when she thinks about this seriously as a very bright, caring person, she'll recognize that this could be a precedential move and not necessarily in the right direction. So I want to thank the staff in her absence for bringing her idea forward for public discussion. And I think everyone recognizes what a tough spot the city budget is in, as with the county and every special district in California because of the severity of the recession. But I appreciate her creativity, but I'm not sure this is the year on short notice to try to bring this forward. But we do have a motion and a second. Are there any last comments for the staff before we put it to a vote? I think Mr. Wilson raised his hand first.
Thank you, Chair. This is actually a question for you, I think. First, I want to compliment you, Chair, on your very thoughtful response here the last several minutes. So the motion on the table directly, nowhere in our motion on the table is there any subliminal, under the lines, somehow within the budget, or other mention or discussion of the suggestion or question brought forward by Councilmember Falcone, correct?
No, actually, not only is this discussion going out through the city cable channel, but the staff, as diplomatically as possible, is trying to get a good synopsis of all the comments and feedback from the committee and from the public on this suggestion. And so I think it's going to be in the record in the minutes for the next meeting. And I think Mr. Weber and I will be hopefully available when the council moves to take action on the budget. And I think every member of the council, whether they're here tonight or not, will be able to watch the discussion on the government channel. So I think it's going to be fairly clear that there was a lively discussion about the concept that was floated as a trial balloon and what the thought of the committee was on that. But the actual noticed item for the agenda was our recommendation to the Parks and Recreation Commission and to the City Council on the draft budget that was presented earlier.
Mr. Chair, thank you for clarifying that for the record. I have no further comments or questions.
Mr. Schluter, final comments?
Yes, regarding the balloon, I would quote the sample ballot. It says, provides that the proceeds, this is Measure B, provides that the proceeds be used to fund creek restoration and clean water programs to improve the quality of the water that flows to the ocean be adopted. That doesn't seem to be including beach cleanup. And then I've just quickly reviewed this, the goals and objectives that are included in the original packet that Mr. Benson gave us, and nowhere in there does it have anything that even relates to beach cleanup. So it doesn't seem like that was part of the original goals of the Measure B funds. Having said that, conceptually, it seems to me one of the things that a transient sees when they come to Santa Barbara and visit the beaches is they see the crowd on the beaches. And so conceptually, it seems to me there's a very close connection here in that if I'm a visitor and I see a nice clean beach, I'll come back. If I see a bunch of crap on the beach, I'm less likely to come back. And so conceptually, it seems like a logical connection to me. I see both sides. I'd like to comment one comment on the budget, and I will vote for the budget. I approve of the budget. But even as a member of the Budget Committee, I have to express some frustrations. We get put before us a budget, and speaking personally, it's real hard for me to evaluate the budget. You know, if somebody asked me, well, did you look at the possibility of shifting X thousand dollars from this program to that program, I'd have said, no, I have no idea whether that would be a good idea or not. So I wish that the budget process created alternative budgets or different perspectives so that we could see if we did this, the budget would look like this, an alternative emphasis would look like that, an alternative emphasis would look like that. Now, everybody, and me included, recognizes you've put an awful lot of effort into this, and what I'm suggesting is put even more effort into it. But I feel like that I'm being asked to vote whether the sky is blue or not. And sure, I'm going to approve the budget, but what I'm really approve of is my belief that the staff has done the best they can do, and the budget really is a good budget. And so my approval is of the staff and the process, but I don't know about the numbers. I really don't. And so if I was before a Cheney commission and they threatened me and said, have you really evaluated this budget? No, I really haven't. Did you ask these questions? I really don't even know the questions I asked. So I approve the budget, I approve the process, and I really think you've done a good job. I don't know about the numbers. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Schluter. Before we vote on the motion to recommend this budget proposal to the Parks and Recreation Commission for their consideration, and then on to the City Council, hopefully for their approval and adoption, I would like to point out that the City of Santa Barbara Budget and Finance Program, Mr. Pearson and Mr. Samaria, under the encouragement of the City Administrator, Mr. Armstrong, begin looking at the detailed budget process for the entire city, literally every penny, usually the day or 2 days after the council adopts the current budget. And as a matter of fact, in terms of building scenarios for the future, they usually are already building scenarios for next year and the year after, even concurrently with the discussion that we're having now, so that if any member of this committee or any member of the public wanted to invite Mr. Pearson or Mr. Samaria or any of their team to understand in greater detail how this process works before the actual council budget submittal process, I think they'd always be willing to have coffee with you or breakfast and go over the permutations and how far in advance they're looking literally for every penny that the city manages on behalf of the community. It's really, really impressive when you see how much work they're doing. And I think, as you pointed out, that level of detail and commitment goes right down through the Parks and Recreation staff and Ms. Zachary and her team, and through Mr. Benson and his whole team, so that you notice at today's hearing, and similarly a week ago Monday at the council meeting, there wasn't a single question that was put to them that they not only had already thought about it, but that they didn't have the information rapidly available for a detailed answer. So this work is going on all year long and looking way to the future. But speaking of the future, we have a motion and a second to recommend that the committee approve the 2010 budget and forward that recommendation to Parks and Recreation Commission and to the City Council. So all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right. Let the record show that the motion has been adopted unanimously. Before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I would hope, Mr. Benson and Ms. Zachary, since you're here, that given the enormous interest in the aftermath of the Jesuita fire, that we could have a preliminary report at the June meeting on estimated impacts to the watersheds for Upper Mission Creek and Upper San Roque Arroyo Borough, because obviously the city watersheds have been hit really hard with this one, and I hope you and your staff could have some preliminary data for the June meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Schluter and seconded by Mr. Wilson to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.